Okay, welcome to our conference. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know some of you are still settling in, but we want to stick to our schedule as closely as possible. I'd like to welcome you. My name is Jenny Browngen. I'm one of the faculty at UW-Madison School of Social Work and had the opportunity to be chair of this year's conference. I want to welcome everyone to our third annual Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference that is sponsored by the UW-Madison School of Social Work. And so glad that we have so many people here today. As we all know, this conference is one that is offering all of you a chance today to focus as social workers particularly on learning and sharing ideas about how to confront racial injustice. There's been a tremendous interest in this topic, and we had a long waiting list, and I'm so happy that there's such a great turnout today. Before we get started, I wanted to help us all focus on the overriding reason that we do host this conference. We have a mission statement for the conference that I wanted to read to all of you. The annual Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference, sponsored by the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Social Work, challenges social workers to engage in racial and social justice action. Our goals are to explore the impact of social policies and social services on racial inequities, including the unintended consequences of these policies and services. To challenge and empower social workers to address structural inequities within their spheres of influence. To support social workers working toward an increasingly equitable and racially just society. And to celebrate the profound social justice actions of our social work community. Please keep this focus in mind as you go through your day today. We hope you will find a good cross-section of approaches and ideas that are presented and various ways to confront racial injustice and engage in social action. The key today is action and finding what you can do, how to engage in that process, and who you can turn to for supports. As we move through our day, there are some housekeeping items I want to make sure everyone's clear on. First of all, restrooms are down the hall right near the steps. As far as I know, we only have male-female restrooms and not the gender-inclusive ones, but the information desk downstairs might be able to help you if that is something that you would be looking for. Also, if you wish a place to privately nurse your baby today, or anyone that has the infant with them, please let me know or one of the other conference organizers. We will call the people at Union South to find the support room for you. A simple thing, please remember to silence your cell phones. We will also try to stick to our time frame as closely as possible. The day is packed full, so please also try to pay attention to that. Our workshop sessions rooms are very full. I know some people are here kind of at the last minute, and you might not be sure exactly. Pay attention to what's indicated on your name tags. However, Workshop A in the morning and Workshop H in the afternoon are held in this room, so there's a little more wiggle room there. We also had a couple of workshops that we added after the initial few people registered, so there's a little room in the morning in Workshop G and N this afternoon. Otherwise, please go to the workshops that you've signed up for. This room, the varsity room, is our location for our keynote speakers, where we're going to have our lunch and our innovation panel. And at the end of the day, the wrap-up, our speaker will be here at the end of the day, and so this will be our gathering spot. For food, if you had requested special needs, when the servers from the Union will be the people that can help you. You can let them know what your requests were. For CEUs today, please be sure both that you signed in when you got here, as well as at each workshop session, it'll be important to sign that you attended those workshops. At the end of the day, we will have the CEU certificates for people. You will have your evaluation forms to turn in, and then you will receive your certificate. In your folders should have all the information about where workshops are located, information on your speakers. There's a map on the back. All of the workshops, besides the ones in here, are on the third floor. So on the back of the one of your sheets, it does indicate that. And your evaluation form should be in there also. For any other questions, you can please see me, and we have student volunteers, the people who help with registration, as well as standing around in the red UW School of Social Work t-shirts. as well as we have our conference committee here. If any of you in the room could raise your hand so people can see you. I can see Wilder walking through there, and Angela, and we have Holly, and Mary, and Aaron, Lisa should be in here as well, and myself. So please come to us if you have any other last-minute questions. Now, I am very pleased to introduce the director of our UW-Madison School of Social Work, Professor Stephanie Robert. She is here to welcome us all today. Dr. Robert.
I think Jenny's the only person I can follow where I have to actually lift the mic. It does a heart good to see a bunch of social workers in a room during these intense times. Before I make some comments, I would like to say some thank yous. So first, biggest thank you to Jenny Brongen. She agreed a year ago to be the chair of the committee to organize this, and she has been working so hard to pull this together. So please join me in thanking Jenny for all her hard work. But of course, Jenny didn't do it alone, and she had a really strong group of faculty, staff, and students who helped organize, and she mentioned them before, but I'm going to mention them again, and I'd like you to stand. We'll clap after I call your names. Angela Willits, Mary Palaskis. Mary, are you in the room? Holly Pagel, Wilder Dietz. Stand up, Wilder. Lisa Vogel, and Aaron Rosh. I think some of them are still out helping people get in, but this was a great committee of staff, faculty, and students, so thank you to you all for organizing this. I also want to thank everybody who's presenting today. We do things on the cheap at the School of Social Work, unfortunately, so nobody who's presenting today is getting paid. They are here because they believe in what they are speaking about, and they're willing to share their talents with us all. So if you're presenting today at all, please stand and let us thank you as a group. Stand up, stand up. And finally, a thank you to Deborah Rose, who's the chair of our Board of Visitors, who donated a bunch of money to help support this event as well. Our Board of Visitors is very committed to our attempts to improve what we're doing with racial injustice, and so thank you to her. She's not here today, so we don't need to clap, but I wanted to let you know that our Board of Visitors is very supportive of this event. So I don't know about you, but after I caught up on the news media this weekend, I was angry and depressed. And I didn't quite want to go about my day. You know, I just read everything. It took me a while to make it through. We have a student on campus who set fire to black churches in the past and wants to start a hate group on our campus. The president wants to build a wall between us and Mexico and has banned refugees from Syria. You know that I could go on and on about the problems that have happened just in this past week alone. So I was feeling overwhelmed on Saturday, as I have been feeling a lot lately, when I remembered about my privilege, specifically my white privilege and my class privilege. So I want to talk about white privilege for a few minutes. I want to talk about it now before we get going with our day, because there are many white people in the room, and I have fears about how white privilege can get in the way of all of us in this room moving forward together to address racial injustice. My white privilege means that when I get depressed about the state of the world, like I did on Saturday, I have the privilege to escape it, in theory anyways. In theory, I can ignore the state of the world and go about my life without having to deal with what's going on. I have the privilege of choosing this. I recognize that my friends of color, our students of color, people of color, do not have the luxury of turning off what's happening in the world right now. For example, Am I incensed that we have a student on campus who has set fire to black churches and wants to start a hate group? Yes, I am. But I don't fear for my life the way that my black colleagues and black students do when they hear about this person being on campus. White privilege means that we white people don't have to face the chronic stressors and strains of racial injustice and threat, the day in and day out of stress that can never be avoided. So first, I think it's really important that we recognize and talk about white privilege together. Second, I think that it means that those of us who are white and are fighting for racial justice, we have additional responsibilities for stepping up, because our privilege means that we actually have more energy to put towards this effort. We're less likely to be exhausted by the day-to-day reality. If I'm exhausted, I imagine how exhausted our students of color feel with all they face in some of our classes, in our school, in our institution, in our community, and in our world right now. However, I also believe that white people, while having added responsibility to step up, should also not be the ones leading the ongoing and emerging efforts around racial injustice. I believe now's the time for many white liberals and lefties, that's what I'm going to call us, white liberals and lefties. It's time for us to take a backseat to those who are leading from the grassroots, to be good allies rather than leaders. Of course, this is a bit of a generalization, as there are places for white people to lead in addressing social injustice. But in general, I think white people need to do a lot less talking, as I stand up here in front of you, a lot more listening, and a lot more participation as allies in addressing racial injustice. However, in saying this, I also recognize that white people can go too far in taking a back seat. By this, I mean that some white people are so worried and guilty about their privilege that they're afraid to participate, afraid of stepping on toes, afraid of not being accepted as an ally. I've seen this lead to inaction, and that's not okay. Indeed, I've talked with some of our white students who are so afraid of not wanting to be seen as barging into spaces where they're not wanted, that they're afraid to reach out at all to be allies in the fight against racial injustice. And I think this is a problem. Simply put, as white people, we need to be okay with getting yelled at now and then for our white privilege. We need to get over it and keep trying to be allies and to do good work. There are too many racial and social justice issues now that need all of our attention. Those of us who are white need to recognize white privilege, work hard as thoughtful allies, and not be afraid to have our feelings hurt by people who may question our motives or who are just frustrated that day. We need to get over it. There's way too much work to be done. In fact, our code of ethics requires us to take action. In one excerpt of the code of ethics, just to remind you, though I know you have it all memorized, quote, social workers should act to prevent and eliminate domination of, exploitation of, and discrimination against any person, group, or class on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, marital status, political belief, religion, immigration status, or mental and physical disability. That's a lot of obligation. And on your tables, I've placed copies of the section of the Code of Ethics that's on social and political action because I think it's really important today. It's too long for me to read, which is why I put it on your tables. So if you don't quite have it memorized, reread it and remind yourself. Maybe put it on your bathroom mirror at home. Remind yourself what it's our obligation to do. So our Code of Ethics requires that we take action. Maybe there's a few people in the room who aren't social workers, but we'll make you honorary social workers because you're here. I know that some of you are newer to moving your beliefs and ideas into action, and it can be scary. Hopefully today you will take away a range of ideas of what you can do as an individual and how you can engage with other groups to work together to address racial injustice. Today, we should question and learn from each other and push each other, but in the end, find ways to support each other to move forward. We all need to be brave, to fight, and to not let ourselves be divided and conquered. In closing, I'm very proud that our school has made this conference an annual event. This is the 3rd annual, and we're committed to keeping it going. And very grateful again to the organizers and the presenters. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to listen and learn. Let's get on with it. Jenny.
Well, and thank you again, Steph. Without the School of Social Work behind this and getting this going, we wouldn't be able to have such a large group. As you look around, this is a big group of people, and I'm very happy that everyone has been able to be here. In a minute, I will be introducing Dr. Hernandez, who will be our keynote speaker this morning. After he is finished, we'll have a brief break. You can grab anything else of the food that's there, and then please find your workshop sessions, as you can see on the schedule of how that would go. And then we will be back here after that. Dr. Hernandez is a licensed psychologist who has over 15 years of experience in the areas of mental health, education, and healthcare. As a trainer, supervisor, and consultant, he specializes in the areas of integrated behavioral health, multicultural issues, and collaborative approaches. He is a national consultant in the area of integrated healthcare and has provided numerous workshops and academic courses in the areas of cultural equity, trauma-informed care, and well-being. Throughout his career, he has worked in various community-based settings, assisting professionals and organizations in their organizational development and implementation of evidence-based practices. He completed a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he currently works as Assistant Director of Integrated Health at the Madison Metropolitan School District. A warm welcome to Dr. Hernandez.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Angela. I really appreciate this opportunity to be here with all of you today. And as predicted, I think I think we're good. All right. Okay. All right. So I really appreciate this opportunity. I know that in the contentious and difficult times that we are living, these type of spaces are particularly important for us to come together, to reflect, to dialogue, and to really consider how do we do this work? How do we do social justice? How do we do racial justice? Now, I want to start today by reading you an essay. It's called The Equity Manifesto by Policy Link. But before I do that, I just want to take a moment. I want to take a bit of a mindful pause together, just to have us settled. I don't know about you. I appreciate the context of today, of the news of this weekend, of yesterday, both here in the university as well as our nation. It's hard. So it is to be expected that we are unsettled, distracted, and full of expectation as well. So if you wouldn't mind just to take 1 minute together to just sit. Just to sit and know you're sitting. And just to pause for a moment before we begin. Equity Manifesto. It begins by joining together, believing in the potency of inclusion, and building from a common bond. It embraces complexity as cause for collaboration, accepting that our fates are inextricable. It recognizes local leaders as national leaders, nurturing the wisdom and creativity within every community as essential to solving the nation's problems. It demands honesty and forthrightness, calling out racism and oppression, both overt and systemic. It strives for the power to realize our goals while summoning the grace to sustain them. It requires that we understand the past without being trapped in it, embrace the present without being constrained by it, and look to the future, guided by the hopes and courage of those who have fought before and beside us. This is equity, just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential, unlocking the promise of the nation by unleashing the promise in us all. So there's so many different ways to begin a conversation about racial justice. And I don't know about you, but I find words like that, inspiring words, well-written words, to be really important during this time. But it doesn't come without difficulty. There is no doubt that today we feel the tension that is out there. And as I was developing these remarks and thinking about them, I felt that too. I felt a sense of being torn in a number of different ways. And the first one is this notion of purpose. You know, what is the purpose of our nation? What is the purpose of our democracy? What is the purpose of our institution of education? What is the purpose of our discipline, social work, of our organizations, of the teams that we're part of? And what we know is that there is unfortunately no consensus, right? The essay begins with the notion of the potency of inclusion, right? Basic idea, to include people, to say, hey, the more voices, the more people that participate, the better. Strengthen diversity, just sort of the basic idea where we start. And what we're finding that becomes suddenly quite countercultural. Well, not really, right? Only certain leaders, certain voices, and certain power find that to be not the case. But we have a different vision, right? And maybe consensus is never really the goal, right? It's not really realistic to assume. But what I really think about is, what are our core values? What are we really supposed to be primarily about? And I think many of our organizations, many of the spaces that we are part of do suggest, right? Respect, compassion, inclusion, diversity, equity. We recognize the disparities that are out there, and yet the question is, what are we doing? How do we respond in relation to it? Now, the second tension that I have felt is this tension between fear on the one hand, right? Concern about what is about to happen. The urgency, the impeding potential catastrophe, right? And I think many of us are in that camp. We call ourselves realist, right? For others, we are pessimist, fatalist. And then on the other hand, there's many of us who say, no, right? We have a strength that we have seen in the streets, that we see when decisions are made that don't really reflect our larger purpose. And for many of us, depending our histories, we say we have been here before. Nothing has really have changed. Sure, maybe more visible, but we say bring it on, right? We say there's strength, there's resolve, we can do this. This is not permanent. But yet there's a tension, right? And my nature is to, well, I tend to be a little bit more of an optimist, but, I go for the middle path. But then sometimes I worry about the middle path, right? Because I don't have the urgency of action. And then sometimes I don't have the real, almost delusional optimism that we need to have to really come together. So there's the struggle, right? And the struggle might be a little euphemistic, right? There's the pain about what's going on. There is the trauma that it's historical, it's current, and all of us worry that it becomes institutionalized, especially for those that are at the margins. And along with that struggle, which creates a sense of hopelessness, there's that responsibility that then we also feel to say, hey, I need to act. I need to organize. I need to follow through on some of these things. So where do we land, right? These tensions are difficult. And then, of course, there's the awareness. As I'm going to say later, I'm making a lot of assumptions about you all today as social workers. I think that you all are aware, right? I think we are aware of the racial disparities. We're aware of the pain and the trauma and what's going on out there. And yet, what is our capacity to be able to intervene, to do something? That's what I'm interested in. That is my struggle, right? Many years ago, when I took the courses, I said, wow, right? And when I've read additional reports that have come out, but then what is my capacity today, given my role, given where I am, to intervene in a strategic way that can make a difference? So I move into today's objective, which I think not necessarily resolves some of these tensions, but I think give us a sense of focus. I want to consider the practice of 5 simple habits today. We'll see how simple they are as we get through them, that have the potential to disrupt the social patterns that nurture racial injustice in our society. So I'm going to propose these for your consideration today. And a little bit, and there's a number of things that I'm not going to do today. So as you notice, it's a 2.0. So I'm not going to provide the foundation. Again, I'm assuming almost all of you have this, right? The Cultural Competence 101. The importance of doing your own racial identity work. This was mentioned. Understanding your racial privilege. Also understanding the echoes of internalized racism and how that plays out inside of who you are. The importance of knowledge, informing yourself, skills development, etc. And then core concepts. Today I'm not going to define the social construction of race. I'm not going to define intersectionality or microaggression. These are things that are really important, right? Critical reading. And I want to take a little bit of a different approach. I'm also not necessarily going to try to motivate you, to show you why we should do this, because again, I'm assuming that you're there. I'm assuming that you have buy-in. Now, of course, we all have various levels of readiness and motivation to engage, but I'm not going to necessarily show you either a ton of data. I'm assuming that most of you, if not all, have read the Race to Equity report, showing the racial disparities in Dane County. If you have it, it's required reading. Very important. So I want to place a context for these, quote, simple habits and systems thinking, something that will be familiar to many of you. So a few quotes to sort of ground us and give us a bit of a common language here. So typical definition. While systems can be broken down in parts which are interesting in and of themselves, the real power lies in the way the parts come together and are interconnected to fulfill some purpose, right? So it's very interesting sometimes when we do racial justice, we take one piece and then we just focus on it in isolation. Now, implicit bias is a powerful concept. It's a great jump-off point right, to begin conversations around racial injustice. And yet when we take that in isolation of everything else, I think it becomes problematic, right? Because part of the idea is that we all have implicit bias. And if we do, then, okay. So what else is at play here? Well, what is at play is that I am an agent, right? How do I manage implicit bias, which of course is part of it, but how also implicit bias is negotiated within our systems and institutions? What is it that happens with it? And then most importantly, right, how is it that systems come together? What is the purpose of the system? And at face value, the purpose can be quite universal, right? Educational institution, well, we want to educate, right? We want to support, we want to cope. But it becomes then interesting when we say, well, are the institutions that we are part of are promoting the racial disparities that we know exist? So is that part of their purpose? To maintain these racial inequities somehow? Is that consistent? Are they silent to them? How does that play systemically inside? So I think that this notion of purpose, how things are interconnected, are really important. Now, a development that some of you might be familiar with of systems theory is this notion of a complex adaptive system. Collection of individual agents that have the freedom to act in ways that are not always predictable and whose actions are interconnected so that one action changes the context of other agents. So that one agent's actions changes the context for other agents. Now, if we look at our phones, right, they're a complex system. And this phone is not going to change in and of themselves, right? It's a mechanical system, right? I'm able to predict what it's going to do most of the time, right? And in order for it to update it, I need to download new software, etc. It's not going to change in and of itself. But we're thinking of systems that involve humans. They are adaptive. They influence each other. And when we look at the social systems that support racial injustice, we know it's complex. We know there's many different parts, right? We know obviously it's systemic. But the adaptive part is sometimes that we don't forget or no reflect, right? It is interesting today how the legacy of slavery, white supremacist ideology, it's out there, it's adaptive, right? It's implicit, it's symbolic, right? And it's still with us in different ways. It is, quote, self-organizing. And how does that happen? And we see that, as was mentioned, in our very campus, in our very community. And if that is the case, right, how do we respond to that, right? So the metaphor is that we need to be more like farmers than engineers, right? So engineers are experts in mechanical systems. We can predict them. We know A leads to B, etc. We have rigid models, right? Now, how does a farmer approach its craft, right? For sure, there's a science. For sure, there's knowledge, right? There's best practices out there. But there's an understanding of unpredictability as we relate to that system, right? They can never control everything fully. There's a sense of acceptance when it comes to how things are going to work. But they're always optimizing their practice to get the best results. They're investing incredible amount of energy and effort into that optimization. So are we doing that, right? As we look at the climate in our university community, in our organizations, are we optimizing what is out there in a way that is as rigorous as the farmer approaches its crop? Personally, I don't think so, right? I think we're failing at that. Again, with awareness, we become a little bit more hopeful, but it becomes more difficult, right? So our understanding as an adaptive system becomes really important. Now, there's a liberating finding when we look at that, right? Because often we look at complexity science and chaos theory and all that stuff, and it becomes really overwhelming. But the liberating finding is that relatively simple rules can lead to complex, emergent, innovative system behavior. Let's take a quick example. Imagine a family that is in conflict, and we know that the parental subsystem is really sort of the source of a problem. A lot of conflict, a lot of difficulty. So we know, right, that the layers are great, right? You could look at each one of the partners and say, okay, well, you know, you have a history, you have these concerns, these issues, these problems. But then sometimes you can get them to engage in one simple thing. So for example, right, every other day, sit down, right, and just listen and practice reflective listening back. Improve your communication. No purpose, nothing else, just practice listening. You do that for 10 minutes and then you walk away, right? We know that's one of the practices, the often recommended homework. Now again, you know, to get folks to do that might be quite difficult, right? A lot of motivation and engagement needs to happen, but it's a very simple practice that carries so much with it. And we know that if, in this scenario, the couple is able to do that week in and week out, we know there's going to be a change. And again, the dynamics are still going to be there, right? The complexity is still there. At times there's going to be chaos that's going to overwhelm that system. But that simple habit, right? The changing of that rule, how is it that we relate to each other has a great impact. So that's where I begin here, right? With 5 simple habits. So the idea is that as we think about racial justice and racial injustice and systems of oppression, the complexity is amazing. I resisted the temptation to show you, like, you know, funky models with lots of circles and arrows and everything. You probably were expected to see that. So I'm actually going to avoid that, right? We know the complexity is out there. You've read those chapters, right? So the approach I want to take today, that maybe there are some more simple things that we can do that might be able to do that. So I'll be really curious to see what you think about these, okay? And some of them, again, they might not be all that different from what you do. These are things that have helped me in my own process of striving to reflect these principles that we are discussing. So let's start. Number 1, focus on your circle of influence. Some of you might be familiar with this. It comes from the very popular book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And the idea, it's pretty straightforward, is anything that happens in your life, anything, this idea would go, you can put in one of 2 circles, right? You can put it in your circle of concern or your circle of influence, right? So fairly self-explanatory. Something within your circle of influence, you have an impact, right? Circle of concern, yeah, you're worried about it, it's there, you've noticed, but you have either no influence or minimal. So some examples is the weather, right? So you have no influence over the weather today and tomorrow. I looked at my clock, below 1, right? Today. I had no influence over that. Now, you know, some of you will argue, wait a second, global warming, you know, et cetera, this and the other, right? Of course, there's a minimal influence, but how winter is going to go, I have no influence over the weather itself. Again, I could do other things, you know, wear a nice coat, et cetera, but no influence over it. We have also minimal influence over others. We know that, right? To change what you think, what you feel, right? Government, right? How much influence do we have, direct influence of government? Now again, right, we have some relative influence, and that's what we're seeing, movement or organizing. We'll talk more about that. Things that happened in the past, again, 0 influence over that. It's done. And then finally, larger forces in the economy. So the other circle is, of course, influence, which maybe not surprising, have to do with more things related to us, right? So our own health, my own effort, what I put effort towards, my interactions with other individuals, certainly my part of the interaction, right? If somebody says something to me that I find offensive and insulting, I have a choice at that moment in terms of how do I respond to that. And then lastly, what are my goals, right? What do I really want to do? So the idea is fairly simple. The idea goes that the more you focus in your circle of concern, again, things that you have little impact over, the more it grows, which means that your circle of influence gets smaller. And then the opposite is true. The more you focus on that circle of influence, then it expands. So to have it, it starts with a bit of a mental note. Something happens to you. For me, I always think, is this within my circle of influence? Can I do anything about this right now? And sometimes just that simple note can be quite helpful, right? Because then it gives me options. And if it is on your circle of influence, then yeah, you have the option to act, right? That becomes sort of a path that you can take. Now, if it's on your circle of concern, then you strongly want to consider the option of simply letting that go. Now, of course, that's harder than it, right? It's hard to do that, certainly with many things. But we may want to place our focus on what is my capacity at that moment to really let this go, because again, I have no influence over it. Now, alternatively, you can say, well, yeah, I have little influence over it. I have very little influence over Congress and, the executive branch of our government, but I'm really concerned. So then we need to strategize, right? So it becomes a different process. We don't want to act as if it is in our circle of influence, because that's going to be a tension there. That's going to be difficult. So 2 scenarios stem out of the main thing that happens. Imagine yourself in the workplace, and you witness somebody else saying a racially offensive comment. Right? You're surprised. You're shocked. Now, scenario 1, this person who said this is a new colleague, a young colleague who you're actually mentoring. You're their mentor, right? And you're going to meet with them in a week from today. So, within your circle of influence, right? So you have a lot of choices there in that situation to be able to say, now again, it's not completely in your circle of influence, right? Because it's another person. But you have a relationship, you have a conversation. This is somebody who you're shaping, who you are professionally sort of developing. Now, scenario number 2 is this person who said this offensive comment is a senior leader who you've never met and who you're actually a little intimidated by, right? So the situation changes at that moment. That would definitely be in your circle of concern, but you have really minimal influence over that. Now again, there is the common wisdom that we need to choose our battles in these type of scenarios. We cannot take on every single battle. Every single person that said something, offensive, are you going to be, right on top of them? And I think that's true. But my question would be, do you choose some battles? Right? The 10 few times that you could have chosen that battle, did you choose any of them? Right? How about the last 20? Right? So often I get worried about that, right? We have hard jobs, we work really hard, we do our social justice work through our work, and then on top of that, a colleague is going to go and say something like that? I need to take care of myself. I need to go home, turn on the TV, right? And again, that's important. I do believe that we need to choose our battles, but again, when are we choosing them? So in that scenario with the senior leader, what do? Maybe in that situation, you in fact let it go. Maybe you put it in the parking lot saying, okay, right? But maybe you go to that other senior leader who is a little bit more responsive. Not that you're going to necessarily, you may choose to share the incident, but you may ask them, hey, I'm just wondering, what is your impression around bias and stereotypes and the type of environment that we have? And you realize that that younger senior leader is on board, right? Or you realize that they might know where you're coming from, and it might validate you maybe explicitly or implicitly. So again, you develop a strategy and you respond. But knowing, again, where is the incident and what are your options becomes important. All right. Simple habit number 2. Define the problem. To get us started, I'm going to start us off with the obligatory Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. So Calvin says, the more you know, the harder it is to take decisive action. Once you become informed, you start seeing complexities and shades of gray. You realize that nothing is as clear and simple as it first appears. Ultimately, knowledge is paralyzing. Being a man of action, I can't afford to take that risk. Throws out the book. Hobbes says, you're ignorant, but at least you act on it. Right? So again, the importance of defining the problem, to knowing what it is that we really are talking about. And we are often so averse to that, to really clearly spend the time defining what it is that's going on. Right? As we look at politics these days, there's so much reaction, a ton of reaction. But are we ever really defining what is the problem here? Defining it? Right? That we have a vision of an ethnocentric United States, a vision of a country that is based on exclusion, that's right, a new philosophy. Now, if we use those words, now again, we could use much harsher words, of course, more direct words, probably more accurate words. But if that really is what's going on, right, how much do we do that? Now, the notion of defining the problem is one of the habits of systems thinking, right? Sort of cartoon here comes out of Walter's Foundation, Systems Thinking in Schools. Really interesting sort of set of cards that really shows different habits for how to think in terms of system. And they highlight the importance of considering an issue fully and resisting the urge to come to a quick conclusion. Right? Because often one of two things happen. Either we react like Calvin and we're saying like, it's too overwhelming. Are you kidding? Yeah, I know. We have racial disparities in our organization. We know the inequities that happen. But it would be just too hard, too overwhelming, too difficult, right? We're going to be overwhelmed emotionally, so we're not going to go there. Forget it. We just need to go on. Go on with the crisis of the week. Go on with the work that needs to be done. Alternatively, we reach a quick conclusion, right? We just say, well, I think it's this. And often, that option is the path of least resistance, right? The path of least emotionality, of least difficulty, right? Because we know, right, it does take time to understand the dynamics of a problem. And one of the questions that they propose, I found really interesting is, how can I help others be patient while living with unresolved issues? That's interesting, right? We often don't think about that, right? We're so quick to move. And often when we know that issues are complex and that there are equity concerns that we need to really attend to, then our impatience, right, is loaded. You feel invalidated. You felt like, well, but what are the equity considerations here? Well, thanks for bringing that up. We'll put that in the parking lot again, right? So how can we, using our skills, be able to say, do we need to slow down and take more time to do this, right? I find that being one aspect that is really important and critical. So one of the added challenges when we come to define the problem within the arena of racial justice is we know that the dominant paradigm of how to deal with race in our country, in our communities, particularly in primarily white environments, is color blindness. is based on avoidance. We just are not going to go there, right? We're not going to go there. It's how we engaged with it. It's by avoidance. It's not there. The one element that may be so present for me as a person of color then is basically pushed to the side. Right? I always struggled with that. I was born in Puerto Rico. I was born and raised there. When I was 18, I moved to the mainland US, go to college, jumped around, but mostly around the Midwest. Went to college in Ohio, went to East Coast for a couple years, came back here, did my, I was mentioned, my doctorate here at UW-Madison. And one of the things I noticed immediately when I first went from Puerto Rico to very interesting, primarily white university in Dayton, Ohio, is that differential experience, right? The differential experience between the white student and the black student. Black students just didn't look so happy, looking down, unengaged. That's what really sparked my curiosity. What's going on here? How come it's right for an environment that it's supposed to promote values of community, values of justice and activism? How when we look at our climate, right, and the dominant paradigm is one of avoiding those dynamics, right? And that for me has been a constant, right? What is our level of resisting that avoidance? And noticing the various degrees that organizations and institutions are willing to engage with it. Now, color blindness, right, is an automatic justification that precludes any intervention. If your mental model is avoidance, we don't need to intervene. We don't need to create a committee. Why would we? Why would we need a committee? Why would we need a work group around racial disparities? We're here to serve all people, right? We're here to have a universal approach. But the importance of a racial justice framework is that, sure, it's universal, sure, and it is also targeted, right? It is also attending to those disparities. So yeah, I'll validate, I'll empathize, yep. For others, yeah, really important. Yes, we have these organizational principles that cut across everyone. And, right, both and how are we being targeted as well? All right, we're moving quickly here. So, the other side of the coin, defining the problem, really important. Jumping into the dynamics. And yet, right, as was mentioned earlier, one of the things that counseling psychology, the discipline, and social work is our interest in strengths, right? So we also want to look at the exceptions to the problem. Very simple idea. There's a problem, there's a difficulty. What are the exceptions? So here, I'm going to quote, I have to admit, my favorite social worker of all time, developer of narrative therapy and practice, Michael White, who now has passed. And he says the following: unique exceptions, they provide a point of entry into the alternative storylines of people's lives that at the outset of these conversations become visible as thin traces, which are full of gaps and are not clearly named. So, all about identifying problems, all about identifying root causes. But sometimes, right, that suggests defensiveness, difficulty, right? So let me tell you what the problem is with you. It's difficult. One of the sayings of narrative practice framework is that the problem never has 100% influence over a person. Or if, like John Kabat-Zinn says, if you're breathing, there's more going well with your body than wrong, right? The problem never has it. And often, for ourselves who are advocates and activists, we sometimes struggle there, right? Because we see instances of racism, instances of oppression, instances of marginalization, and we totalize, right? We sort of assume the totality of that person, that organization, that group as being always based on that. And again, there are exceptions, right? They are hate groups. That's what they are about. And often, it's not 100%. What are the exceptions? What is that alternative storyline? Right? We know that organizations that are part of the status quo that is supporting racial disparities in our community, we also know that they do a lot of awesome work. You do a lot of awesome work day in and day out. You are navigating the many contours of culture and race and gender and class, etc. You navigate that. Now, yeah, we could always do it better. We could always do it more mindfully, more wisely, etc. But how do we tap into that? What type of conversations, right? And it's very different for us to have a conversation about, okay, so what's the problem? Versus like, when are you compassionate? When are you inclusive? Right? Because often, those values most folks agree with. So tell me more, right? Tell me more. Number 4. So to clarify the desired impact. So I want you to do a little bit of a quick, it's not going to be a mindfulness thing, just a little for you to imagine. Imagine yourself in a typical situation where you are supporting, providing a service to someone. I want you to bring that up to your mind. Maybe as a family, maybe as an adult, maybe as in the schools, working with a student, right? If you're, maybe as a colleague, right? And I want you to think for a moment, what is it in that moment that you're about to sort of provide to the other person, right? And usually it's one of a few things. Sometimes it's knowledge, right? I want to give you some information. Sometimes we provide a holding environment, right, of sorts, support, empathy, etc. And sometimes it's just a very helpful resource, right, that we provide. So just imagine that moment. What are you providing? And just picture that other person, other group. And now I want you to think about, what do you think would be the ideal attitude of that person as they receive what you want to give them? Right? We can assume that you have identified a need, right? We've done our work, we've interviewed, we've either diagnosed or assessed some sense of the problem, and we're going to offer somebody. What is your desired attitude? Let's see, maybe we can have some folks jump in and say a few things. What comes to mind? Gratitude. Of course. I've worked really hard. Come on. You know how many years I've gone to school for this? You know how much effort I put into identifying your need? I was very collaborative, right? I even did some research last night. I Googled it, right? And here I am. I'm going to offer you something, so I'm expecting some gratitude. Excellent. What else? Openness. Definitely, right? Wouldn't you be open, right? I mean, don't resist what I'm about to say. Just be open, right? Maybe 2 more. Safety. That's right. Right? And safety is a shared process, right? We can assume that we are facilitating a sense of safety and trust, but it's interesting that they should also facilitate a sense of safety. Probably for me as well. I mean, I don't want you to get all aggressive, right? I don't want you to be screaming when I'm doing all this work, right? So it's interesting. Safety is an interesting condition, right? How is that created? Who's responsible for it? One last one. Genuine. That's right. And we can think about it. We have pretty high expectations, right? in that environment. Now, another one that I don't know if any of you was thinking about it, but if I'm really honest, and it's a little bit of a version of these, it's obedience. Whoa, right? It's a harsh one. Maybe that's not very social work type thing for me to say. But right? But if, I've identified that you're struggling with anxiety, and, I have this really shiny new mindfulness technique, and I think you should practice it. I mean, hey, I'm a fan, but nevertheless, I expect a sense of openness, gratitude, and obedience. Hey, I have some homework for you, right? I have this great resource. It's a great organization. I've worked with them many times. Here's the number, right? And that goes well when they follow through with it. Now, some of you might have noticed the little quote there. Some of you may know where I'm going from here, right? These things are a condition of a banking model of Paulo Freire. Talks about it in the context of education, but we can also apply it to us. Our desired impact is that we want the individuals that we work with to be passive recipients of the knowledge that we're going to deposit upon them. That we expect that from them. I mean, yeah, I want folks to be activists and to be organizing and to be critical, but not in my office. That would be very inconvenient. I mean, after all, come on, I only have, right, anywhere from 15 to an hour. We don't have time to be making this complex, right? So, if I'm able to fill them with interventions, so here's a little cognitive behavioral therapy, boom. Here's a little bit reflective listening with a nice metaphor tied into it, boom. Here's a little bit of mindfulness strategy from the latest book, boom. You're filled, we're good, you have gratitude, next. Now, of course, I don't want to really be disrespectful of these powerful interventions that we do, but it's an interesting lens for us to examine how is that relationship really working out. So the more I'm able to fill those receptacles quickly, timely, the better provider I am and the better I feel. The more passive they are, the client, in giving us permission to be filled, then the better clients they are. Right? And your conditions, and again, I'm right there with you. No need to feel bad around the things you share because I'm right there. That's what I'm also looking for. But Paulo Freire challenges us to look at the dynamics of power within our interactions. So what's the alternative? Now, within education, he talks about problem-posing education, right? The idea that instead of just giving you knowledge, I'm going to give you a problem so we can really grapple with it. I think in our profession, let's go back to Michael White. He talks about, if my presentation, clearly I spent too much time on this slide. Let's do this. All right, here we go. So Michael White talks about a de-centered approach to practice. Now the de-centered approach is who is at the center of our work. And usually we know it's us, right? We set the stage, we set the assumptions, we set the context, the rules, right? And a de-centered approach, sure, I'm still going to be influential. I'm still a professional. I'm here to deliver a service, to deliver support, to deliver strategies. But who's at the center is the individuals who work with us. We work according to their priorities. And again, how much time do we take to find out what their priorities are? Well, I have a form to fill out, you know, so it has like 30 questions. So it'll be your priority after the 30 questions, right? That's okay. We have statute. We have things we need to do. We want to keep our jobs, right? And yet, how do we open that space for their priority, their stories, their skills, their capabilities? We struggle to have them have primary authorship of what happens in our interaction. It's very interesting, right? I mean, those of you that actually have been the recipient, whether it's therapy or social services or human services, right? It's always happening to us, right? It's a space where you are rewarded by being passive and obedient in a way. Which is hard because, you know, those of us, most of us who have gone through graduate school, I once heard the quote, which I really didn't like, having spent so many years in graduate school, that one important quality to be a successful, I'll say, doctoral student is to be obedient, right? Because there's a lot of things that you're being told, right? So we're just going along, right? So how do we work in a way where the individuals that we work from have those storytelling rights? So the desired impact, and yeah, maybe this is one of those that is not so simple, but it's to have the individual across from me be active, to have ownership, to be empowered. So I always think about that basic notion. And again, we have our structures, we have maybe limitations, but what are the pockets that we can create, right? Sometimes a simple question after the end of an interaction of, I'm just really curious how this was for you, right? What did we not talk about today that we should have, right? Really provide that space for ownership of the process. And then finally, final simple habit to simply begin again. We know that this work is hard, right? We wish that this was a switch, right? We turn it on and on we go. I know that I have shared these remarks depending on who you are. If you are a person of color, a member of a historically marginalized or oppressed group, you listen to this from a different context than if you are a person who is white, or your cultural identity is one as an agent in our society. But regardless of where you're coming from, right, there is the importance of beginning again. It's going to be a struggle. It's going to be difficult. There's not going to be consensus out there. So we need to start again, right? If the idea is that the disparities are connected, right, with the stereotypes and implicit biases that are then connected with something fundamental about our brain and its desire to either fight or fly, then we're going to have to be continually engaging in it. And what I think it's in between this notion is it's the idea of acceptance, which is hard, right? But acceptance doesn't mean agreement at all, right? We all know that. For me to be able to accept the new leadership in the executive branch of government, for me to be able to accept that, doesn't mean that I agree with it at all. It just means that I'm going to have a better relationship with it because I'm taking care of myself, right? And some of you know where this notion comes from, right? The idea of simply beginning again is one of mindful practice, right? And mindfulness is not about letting go of action. It's about refining your action. It's about being most connected with the action that you choose, to be truly engaged with it. something happens to me, I experience something that is difficult, if I'm reactive, if I am impulsive, then I've actually have lost a lot already. But if I'm able to stay in the present moment, right? And I'm able to then have the option to act more wisely. So again, it's a hard one, right? The notion that, yes, we're going to go out there, we're going to do this work, and my gosh, right? Your code of ethics, amazing, inspiring. Begin again, right? We're focusing on our circle of influence. We define the problem while finding the exceptions. We clarify our desired impact. And we begin again. So, curious about, of course, the response you're having as I share these remarks. And I'm going to take a wild guess, but maybe there's one that maybe is out there. Personal habits. Maybe important. Right? But now we need a social movement, right? If all of us engage in this personal habits, is that really going to transform this complex adaptive system? Agreed. Definitely. But one of the things inspiring to me as a psychologist of social workers is that you are a social movement. You have that code of ethics. You have social justice built in as a real core value. When I was doing my master's in counseling, I'm not really making this up because I'm here, but somehow I actually found myself in the social work library, just hanging out. Why? Because the books I was interested in, they were there, right? Books that talked about social justice, around engagement, around power, around feminism, around critical theory. They were not in the other libraries. So yes, I made a mistake. I'm trying to make up by being here today, right? Honorary member, thank you. So the social movement absolutely is critical for us to be able to engage in. I still like the notion of a personal habit because it's definitely within my circle of influence. Because I know many of us, earlier I was talking to someone who says, yeah, my boss told me about the march yesterday. Envious, right? Your boss, right? And many of us are in organizations that maybe aren't so progressive, right? Maybe they are, but can't be too obvious about it, right? So we live in that tension. So I want to sort of end with just highlighting the paradox, right? Because for me, I'm always interested in that often building a social movement becomes the things that you do after your 8 to 5, right? Becomes your weekend work, becomes your after, then you're done. What are the opportunities for our organizations themselves to become mediums for organization and for real empowerment of our communities? Whoa, wait a second. We have to keep things differently. We have to keep things separate, right? We can't be too political. Well, but if some of the values of the organization are in fact compassion and equity and inclusivity, then how do we work on those, right? And then this collaboration, this being a team player, it's a loaded term, right? What is the good employee these days? Right? To follow along, follow the rules, do not make waves. The path of least resistance is our friend. So then the racial inequities persist, guess what? And we know this, even without the explicit racism. Well, our organization is they do good work, right? Or this organization. And yet it continues. Again, complex adaptive system. So we collude with the status quo rather than challenge it. So as I was said earlier, coming full circles here, we need allies. And an ally takes an active, strategic role in confronting racism. So yes, we create those connections so that my personal habits are not just me in isolation, but they are connected with what you do and what you do. Because yeah, defining the problem isn't just me asking that question, oh, what is the problem, right? So I like to end with this image. Some of you might be familiar with it. It was created by 10th graders from East High School, members of a program called AVID TOPS. AVID stands for Achievement via Individual Determination. It's a college readiness program, and TOPS is Teens of Promise. It's a program by the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County, program in partnership with the Madison Metropolitan School District. They made these on t-shirts, and were raising funds for future undocumented students who could participate in that program. And for me, no doubt, these type of programs are part of the formula for racial justice in our community. And I just see this as very inspiring, right? We are seeds. And my hope is that today that's something that we can internalize, that we are seeds. And not only that, but that as change agents, that we also create the conditions in our schools, in our agencies, in our university, for all of our seeds to grow. Thank you.